Greetings and welcome to the International Pediatric Simulation Society podcast. This show is for people passionate about pediatric simulation-based education, training, and research. Podcast hosts are members of IPSS, a global community of multidisciplinary healthcare professionals from over 30 countries, all dedicated to improving the care of infants and children worldwide. Each week, one of our sub-hosts, Christine Bailey, Elaine Ng, Aaron Karn-Bennett, and myself, Samreen Vora, will introduce you to a new guest and bring you into a conversation with simulationists and healthcare professionals from across the world. Come along. Dr. Samreen Vora here, and today I'm chatting with Dr. Victoria Brazel. Victoria Brazel is an emergency physician, educator, and simulation specialist. She is professor of emergency medicine and medical director of the simulation service at Gold Coast Health and leads the Bond University Translational Simulation Collaborative. Victoria's main interests are in connecting education with patient care through translational simulation in healthcare and in developing high-performing healthcare teams. She has authored over 100 peer-reviewed publications in health professions education, simulation, and teamwork in healthcare. Victoria is a senior editor at Advances in Simulation and co-producer of Simulcast, a podcast about healthcare simulation. Join me as we chat about her most recent work. Hello, Dr. Brazel. I'm really excited for you to join us on our IPSS podcast.
Well, it's lovely to be here. Very nice to see you almost in person and to have a chat about all things sim.
Yep, I concur. I know that this is my first time chatting directly with you. I know we've had some intersections in the past with our sim work, and I also recall that you were the keynote for one of the IPSS virtual conferences a couple of years ago.
Yes, back in the olden days of the pandemic when we were doing everything online. Yes.
That's right. I mean, we did it really well, right? There was a really good pivot to online, probably because we're all simulationists and had some experience doing that.
Yeah.
So I think there's so many things we can talk about your work in simulation. I think we'll see where the conversation goes, but I'd love to start by talking about your recent work. You had a recent article in, I think, earlier this year that was published on VEMS, VEMS. And I remember thinking, what is that? So I would love to talk about it and hear from you how you got to doing that work and how it tied to other work that you've done in terms of teamwork and systems work.
Absolutely. It has been a very interesting little sideline in my simulation career over the last 2 or 3 years. So for the uninitiated, VEMS stands for Visually Enhanced Mental Simulation. And if you were to look at one of these sim sessions, it's a bunch of people you would normally see, doctors, nurses, whoever else, around a patient care episode. But the patient is a flat plastic silhouette representation of a human being, and the treatments and adjuncts are laminated plastic things, laminated plastic ECG dots, laminated plastic syringes. So it sounds like a game. But I'll tell you why we got interested in this. I first read about it, and all tribute here to Berku Dogan, who published an article in the then International Journal of Healthcare Simulation, just describing how they were doing this at that point with their paramedic students. And I thought, this might be a nice thing to add into our work at the Gold Coast Health Simulation Service, because we are a big simulation service embedded in a hospital, and we have to do a lot of high volume, but sort of in short segment type simulations. We do it with an incredibly wide range of learners, in everything from the palliative care team to the community nursing team, not just our critical care colleagues. So we thought, this might be a nice little adjunct. And to cut a long story short, this has been nothing short of a revolution for us, because we've probably had about a 30% increase in our volume of sim activities over the last 3 or 4 years, and most of that has been VEMS. We've continued to use mannequins. We do a lot of sims with simulated human patient actors, and that is excellent sim to do. And we have found that this has enabled the growth beyond our traditional areas, and it is leveraged even for the teams that do usually work with mannequins or simulated patients. It's extended their capacity to run sims. So why is that? And what did we find when we did our research? So we just got really interested. So we essentially did, as you made reference to, a study where we interviewed both facilitators of these sessions and participants of these sessions. And the things that we found were people found it less scary because for some reason they went, well, we're still performing here, but it doesn't seem like it's overwhelming like a mannequin is. And I sort of was a bit surprised by this, but okay, fine. So for some people, it was a little bit of a gateway into, well, this helps people get into sim. For some people, it is, well, this is all we ever want to do. We like this idea where we can come together, we can communicate, we can make decisions. We've still got all the things that the team would be doing, but we can do them in a way that's short, sharp, easy to set up, no technical expertise required, maybe a monitor emulator, and that's about it for the tech stuff. But I am also amazed, and our facilitators are as well, at how engaged people are with it. They just pick up their pen because you can write on the laminated plastic patients and you can start, anything that you haven't got as a laminated tool, you just draw on the patient. And people people started engaging really easily with the VEMS. And we would find people just as intense about it, and we would find people bending down to do their airway management and someone doing their motor muscle memory that people had. And we'd find them just adjusting their view, and we'd find someone putting a little bit of burp on the, cricoid there. And we would, exactly. People were,
your article and you have these two pictures right at the beginning. And I chuckled actually when I saw it, because one of the pictures is exactly what you described. There's like a little plastic laryngoscope and it's all flat. And I looked at the picture and I was like, oh, wow. And it's a little baby, just a plastic, picture of a baby. So exactly that. It looks like, wow, they really get into it. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was a surprise to me. I thought people would think, this is a little bit, like a game. But no, you set it up the same way. You do a pre-brief the same way. You talk about things the same way. As a facilitator, you're right in the room with them because you're giving the cues that obviously this flat plastic thing can't. And so you are engaging and role modeling the engagement. Like, this is what he's saying now. This is his chest wall movement. This is how he's breathing. And it just seems to hit the cues that the practitioners need to create their own mental simulation of what's going on. And I think that's the bit when I started to really read around what happens in people's heads with simulation. This is what we were tapping into, is that doctors, nurses, other healthcare professionals have these scripts, these illness scripts that I think that the educators talk about. And what we needed was to create enough triggers to enable the pattern to be completed in the person's head. So people were often looking up from the patient to see if they could see the algorithm, resuscitation algorithm behind them on the wall. And they were imagining that because this is what they were used to seeing on the resuscitation card. So it turns out, as we've said many times, your brain is a great simulator. And so this triggers those brain simulations. And then if it's combined with the team engaging in an authentic way, you've actually got truly a high fidelity simulation because you've got task fidelity, you've got team fidelity, and your physical realism is actually created by the brain, not by anything else. So this was fascinating to us.
To pause you there because in the sim world, right, that term about fidelity, I think for those of us that have been doing sim a long time, the way you've talked about it right now, we very much understand it that way. But maybe for folks that are joining sim or are novice to sim, talking about fidelity, right, high fidelity, absolutely, I hear you. This is high fidelity, but often people confuse that with high tech. And what you're saying is, it doesn't need to be high tech at all. And flat plastic things in front of us, our brain creates that fidelity, the realism, when we use that word fidelity is what we're talking about. And so for some of our novice folks in sim, just grappling with that terminology, I think is important.
It is. And I think, the group about 10 years ago now, led by Stan Hamstra, looked at this term fidelity and essentially abandoned it and said it's meaningless.
Exactly.
As you say, industry have tended to conflate that with high technology, high cost. And yet what we know is that is one element of what people find engaging, immersive. Because one of the other themes that we got out of our research was that mannequins are confusing.
I saw that, and you have a great little table, and I like looked at it, and then again I chuckled. I was like, mannequins are confusing. Like that was one of the 5, the 5th one. And I thought, that's so real. That's so real, right?
It is. And, we've, been so busy in our pre-briefs trying to tell people to suspend disbelief and come halfway without just really acknowledging mannequins are confusing. But I think this helped me understand why, Samreen. And when I read some of this work about what's happening in our brain with mental simulations, as I said, we've got these scripts in our heads of what a patient with chest pain having a heart attack look like, or if you're a pediatrician person, what does this flat, floppy baby look like? You've got that visual and mental and tactile and everything kind of representation in your head. So we just need to trigger it. But if you've now got a plastic thing in front of you with a little blue light in its lips, in fact, you're getting in the way of triggering the mental simulation. And what people are spending a lot of their cognitive load doing is trying to work out what the cue is that you're trying to send. So in fact, and I'll give you an example of this, are the pupils equal and reactive? And if you're in a VEMS thing, people just, if you're the facilitator and someone is obviously about to look in the pupils of this head injured patient, and you just say, the pupils are 3 millimeters, they're equal and reactive. They just keep moving. They register the cue, and now that's building up the picture in their head. You and I have also been in sims with mannequins that have reactive pupils, and people look at them, then they look at them again, and then they look up at the ceiling, and they say, am I supposed to be seeing reactive pupils?
Yes, that's exactly. Yeah.
That's it, exactly. And so I think we've really, I understand why we started using mannequins. They're very good for some things, but I think we've underestimated the confusion element and what it takes for our participants to get over that. And then worse, we kind of then conflate that with poor performance, because it's actually just confusion that people are trying to navigate. And instead we go, oh, well, they should have done this, but they didn't know they could do that. They didn't know that was in play. They didn't read that cue correctly. So I'll tell you just
confusion and cognitive load, right?
Yes,
so like when they're looking at the pupils and then looking up and like trying to sort, you're increasing their cognitive load, which is not really helping.
No. Well, how can you be thinking about what you are going to do to prevent secondary brain injury if you're so busy working out if these pupil reactions are real or not? And I'll tell you the real proof of this pudding. We still do plenty of sims with mannequins, but what we've changed is we now do what we do in VEMS with the facilitator. We stick them in the room right next to the mannequin. And as soon as we can see someone looking for a cue, like you can tell they're kind of trying to work out how the mannequin's breathing, or they're trying to work out what the skin color and temperature is. So we stand there and we tell people what it is. We give them immediately the kind of cues that we think they're looking for. And the participants love it. We find it's really helpful. And they also tell us, oh, we feel like you're on our side, which of course is what we should be saying and what we should be sending, instead of you're behind this glass window against us, trying to test us, instead of trying to just help us.
Oh, that's so important what you just said. For me, that triggers in my brain, the sim scripts, psychological safety, right? How that's so core to simulation. And then to hear a learner be like, well, now I feel like you're on my side. And you're like, oh man, what did you feel before?
We feel like we can trust these cues.
Yeah.
That was also a surprise to us. So and I think for us, it also, because you're removing, obviously, you can't practice your intubation in terms of the tactile skills and all that kind of stuff. But what it does mean is it allows you a sharp focus on the teamwork, decision-making, communication, because you've removed some of those other elements. So it sort of says, okay, we'll do our airway management practice on a part task trainer another day. But here we're just going to think about how does the team decide what they're going to do, communicate what they do, and coordinate what they're going to do.
I think that that part is important to say so that our industry partners still consider sponsoring our podcast.
I have many great friends at Ladle, and we've had this conversation, and they understand this as well. And I kind of feel for them because, they've been caught up in this arms race
Yeah.
to the most
Yes.
features. And I think
Mhm.
this idea that we could ever combine all the stuff into a human representation, man, we're a long way off that. And I would love to see, and we do see people combining VEMS with part task trainers. And that makes heaps of sense. If you said, well, we actually do want to practice coordination of airway management, then just have a really good quality airway trainer instead of trying to get I call it the Swiss Army knife of the full body mannequin that's sort of got half decent features on a range of things. You can put the IO in and you can do the airway management and you can do CPR and it blinks. But it's not quite as good as if you made a bespoke part task trainer for any one of these tasks. The scissors in the Swiss Army knife are terrible, aren't they? You really want proper scissors. You don't want the ones that are in the Swiss Army knife. So yeah, I feel it's the same with these mannequins that try and capture everything.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's interesting what you're saying, because what we're saying about VEMS and its use. Of course, as you've just explained, it's important matching it with the objectives, depending on what your objectives are. And I think what you're saying is some of simulation, we've come full circle in some ways with this. I think that that's really interesting. Like you said, we got caught up in this, well, at least for industry, to kind of moving the products forward, but as simulationists as well, trying really hard to get to fidelity or realism, thinking that the technology would get us there, and then further training our facilitators. And what I hear you saying is just kind of coming full circle to let's keep it simple and get to the skills that we want our learners to master.
Yeah, exactly. And, it's tempting to not have that discipline of matching modality to objective when you've got a certain modality. Of course, you feel like I better use it. And look, I feel particularly for those of you that do lots of pediatric simulation, the reality is you can't buy a mannequin in every age range. You can't have 18 different mannequins. And so whereas if you can laminate anyone that you want, of the size you want, of the appearance that you want, that I think makes such a difference. So I do think it allows a lot more flexibility. And we've had people, for instance, our renal dialysis nurses combine this with a piece of equipment. Our ICU nurses have done, well, we want to work on the blood warmer. So they actually get out the blood warmer and use it. But we remove all the other aspects that are going to add too much cognitive load. So it does allow this focus.
Yeah, that's kind of awesome. That last part of what you said, the flexibility that it offers, intersects with another topic, I think, for us that, you and I have done simulations and done some research around thinking about equity, diversity, and inclusion and its intersections with simulation. As you were talking about, hey, this allows for a lot more flexibility. You can make it look the way you want. And, it's not like, hey, we got to get not just every size mannequin, but all the different skin tones or whatever, features, whatever it is. And I think the potential to use something like this, particularly when the skills you're practicing are similar to teamwork, communication, bias interruption skills, potentially, like so many possibilities in that space. I'm curious if that's something you thought about as it intersects with VEMS.
Yes, so we've thought about this a lot, and this is probably a disclosure here as well. So, we got quite wrapped up in this, and we think people should do VEMS, whatever. We did discover that people were spending a lot of time laminating cutout silhouettes. So we've actually started a little side business making these kits for people. And we thought, and to your point, we thought a lot about this. So we've essentially made a premature baby, a newborn, infant, toddler, a kind of 6 to 8 year old, and then a teenager. And it's sort of male and female on back and front sides of the fold out things. And in a variety of skin tones and with sort of hairstyles that seem like so it's sort of non-specific, and yet you can see diverse. And I think that's the way we decided to deal with that, because I think one of the downsides to VEMS that we're very aware of is potential patient objectification. It's kind of like there's no real patient in this. And we try and pre-brief to that thoughtfully, saying, look, today is not about thinking about your interaction with patients and families unless we've got, say, an embedded sim faculty being the parent, which I think is actually quite a good thing to do. So we're very clear about that, because negative training is real. And if you just think the patient is always just a passive person on the bed, that would not be the message we want to send. So we've thought a lot about...
Those are not the patterns we want to create.
Exactly, yeah. So we've thought a lot about how do we mitigate against that potential risk. And I think one of the ways is also to be thoughtful about what the representation is, but then also to pre-brief thoughtfully about what's in scope here and what isn't, and to make sure that in our whole of sim program, we obviously have plenty of sessions where that is the primary focus of the activities. So to your point, representation is, I think, a small part of the work that we can do in equity, diversity and inclusion, but it's not a zero part. I think and with that, what are the names we give our patients, and are they suitably representative of the community that we serve? I think we've also got broader, well, maybe not broader, maybe even narrower EDI issues within the healthcare community itself. So I think for us, the other things that we probably have spent a lot of time on is the culture, relationships, hierarchies and interactions within the healthcare teams and across healthcare teams. And for us, we probably have done, just for us, I'm not saying it's more or less important, we have just done more work within the healthcare team than we have necessarily focused on the diversity and equity issues for consumers, although I obviously think that is important as well. So for us, that looks like some purposefully designed sims in those regard, but more so just some sort of thoughtful debriefing when inevitably these issues arise. And the other thing we've done a fair bit of work on is how we represent our colleagues in sims.
Yes.
Many simulations have what we would now call embedded simulated faculty, previously thought of as confederates or whatever term people use, but we use the term embedded sim faculty. And sometimes those people are people from other professions within healthcare. Sometimes they're from other disciplines, think surgery, ICU. And unfortunately, and you know what I'm talking about, whether for amusement or through misguided thinking, but it's realistic, people have chosen to represent their colleagues in not very positive lights. And I don't think that helps. I think that perpetuates stereotypes.
Absolutely.
And in particular, if those people aren't there to have a conversation, then I don't know what we're achieving. And unfortunately, there also sometimes is for the amusement of the sim faculty.
Yeah.
And I think we can do a little bit better than that.
We've
worked a little bit hard on that. And, the nurse who goes off to tea or the nurse who doesn't know what they're doing, like we're just very not interested in those sort of representations.
I'm so excited that you brought that up. My really good friend and nurse leader colleague, Brittany Dolan, who was just past president of IPS, says we talk about this often because there aren't a lot of folks that work across disciplines so closely. And so her and I have worked very closely for a number of years and are always checking each other because it's natural for us to see from the lens that we wear, right? From our frame. So me as a physician, and she has helped me see so much broader. And often we'll be sitting at conferences or presentations, and it just is so glaring to us when, there's one, I remember we had seen a presentation on someone had built this simulation to teach verbal de-escalation skills. And the scenario had portrayed one of the professions so far on this spectrum of like, they're screaming and, and I was like, wow, like that is probably reinforcing negative stereotypes. And now you're building it into this scenario where they're practicing. The other piece you mentioned is just for amusement. I think sometimes people, often in my profession, at least I work, emergency room, it's the surgeons that always get thrown under the bus. And so almost in a way that feels therapeutic for people, but if they're not there and then you're not, and if you're doing a debrief that's not necessarily interprofessional or interdisciplinary, you're just reinforcing stereotypes and you're really not improving team culture. I know you talked about a lot of your research has been in that space. And in fact, you're going in the wrong direction.
Yeah, totally. And, for people who are so into searching out frames and stuff in debriefing, sim people have sometimes been a bit closed to the lessons that are there in front of them. So I'll give you two examples of exactly what we're talking about. One was we were doing a trauma simulation and it was a head injury, and the neurosurgical registrar was involved, took the phone call and said, okay, I'll meet you in the CT scanner. And then in the debrief, it came across that the ED people thought that was kind of rude and not caring. Like, why wouldn't he come into the resus room? Why did he not come? Why did he just say, like, obviously he doesn't care. So he'll meet us in the CT scanner. Whereas when we said, well, why didn't you go into the resus room? He said, I've got nothing to offer. You guys are the experts in the resuscitation. but I want to get things ready and I'll see you in the CT. So it's so easy for us to make assumptions about what we want. Another
And
great
if you
example.
hadn't been there for the debrief, right, that frame would have been lost and continued the stereotypes, right?
Totally. Everyone going, oh yeah, the neurosurgeons, they never
they
come.
don't care.
You know,
they never
they're
come.
not
They're
interested. Exactly.
exactly.
So easy. Another very similar thing, another trauma simulation that we did actually using VEMS, but the focus was on going up to the operating theatre and the interface between the ED team or people who've been looking after the patient downstairs, and then this moment of handover and how that goes. And the reality is the team structure is quite different down in the ED to what it is in the operating theatre. And the tasks are quite different as well. So we had this thing where the ED nurses wanted to hand over to the scrub nurses. Scrub nurses are not at all interested in anything the ED nurses have got to say because they are focused on a procedure. They don't care what medications the patient's had and all this other stuff. Maybe the anaesthetists are, but because each group didn't understand the team structure and function of the other groups, the ED nurses were left going, those theatre nurses are rude. They don't want to listen to anything we've got to say. Yeah. And meanwhile, the scrub nurses are just going, why are the ED nurses hanging around making our theatre dirty? You know, we want to get on with our procedure. And to your point, man, there's so many things we misunderstand about our colleagues, whether they're across professions, whether they're across disciplines. And that has been such a, as you said, eye-opener and ongoing learning for me, you know, as a medical director of a SIM service for the last 10 years, because our SIM service is actually situated within nursing education and research. So probably 2/3 of our participants in SIMs are nurses. So it means I've spent a lot of time in a headspace that as a physician, I didn't grow up with, but has been extraordinarily edifying. And I wish I'd known half the things I know now when I was an emergency department registrar and junior consultant. It would have made life a lot easier understanding how the hospital works from a nursing point of view. But I think the fault lines are everywhere. They're not just across professions. They're everywhere. Yeah,
they're everywhere. And that's why you mentioned, right, disciplines, hierarchy. I mean, there's just so many different places. Reiterating what you just said, I think is so important. And I wonder if there's some ways we can get to that. I think about our medical students and how can we have more, how can we move the timeline back on more interprofessional things sooner, so that we are learning those things sooner, because same for me, like it's just been so gratifying to be like, oh, okay, I'm starting to see where my blind spots are, and in planning sims, in debriefs, and then being able to learn the skills to address it. That's a whole nother level, right? Like how do you then, like you said, sometimes even simulations, even folks that are very open-minded sometimes aren't able to get to that place to wrap their head around that particular frame.
Yeah, totally. And also, I think some of these things are structural. Like I review a lot of manuscripts for advances in simulation, and I'm struck with how many submissions we get related to teamwork and team training, where the participants are all doctors. You know, our residents did this teamwork training and we found this. And I went, oh, what do you mean? And then
who's on the team?
To come back to the point, they said, we did high fidelity simulation. I went, you had no nurses there. How could it be high fidelity simulation? How could it be high fidelity teamwork? And look, I know why that is. It often isn't because they don't like their nursing colleagues or don't want to involve them, but because for a whole variety of reasons, there's no financial support given, there's timetabling, people have got different things, residency education gets protected time and nurses don't. That's been a bit easier for us simply because we have got a different I think structural setup, certainly to Canada, in terms of how people are remunerated and how their days are organised and what kind of leave and educational support they have would be no doubt different again in the US. In Europe, I actually also see a sort of easier thing in this regard, I think, because many doctors are working in salaried positions as they are in Australia, and so they're more similar to the nurses. Doesn't mean it's not always hard, and we have plenty of struggles in this regard as well, but it is a priority for us. And in our SIM service, the top priority if people want access to the SIM service team, the equipment, anything else, is if it's interprofessional, it will always get preferenced over anything that's uniprofessional. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the key. You have to make it a priority. Yeah, you built it in structurally. Just even who you're letting in the door is, hey,
Yeah.
is it interprofessional? And I'm imagining it's not just interprofessional in terms of who's in the sims, who are the learners, but like helping to plan it, right? Because all around that safety net, all around with a variety of diverse experience and lenses to build sims. Well, I know that we've been chatting for a while, and I could talk to you forever. And I know our listeners are probably like arriving at work and they're like, I gotta turn this podcast off. So I'm curious, is there anything else that we haven't chatted about that is just burning for you that you really want to bring up?
Yeah, well, probably just one other interesting thing right now. As you know, I've sort of spent the last 8 or 9 years working particularly in translational sims for systems integration, sim for quality improvement, where the object of the sim is not the improvement of the individuals, but rather using feedback from participants to help us improve the systems. And so thinking about sim as a test bed in which we can try out new workflows, new processes. We're building a new wing at the hospital next week. We're going to do 2 days of simulation to sort of see if the workflows in this space are going to work. So I've spent, and this requires a different kind of approach to simulation design, delivery, data collection and debriefing. And lots of great work has been done all around the world by many people in this regard. But I've recently gone down the rabbit hole of thinking about how AI tools could help us with this simulation design.
Yeah.
And then as we do the sims, help us with data collection, analysis, synthesis and reporting. And have had really quite a lot of success in using custom GPT and other tools to actually make life a lot easier. Just as people who've been using it for writing simulation scenarios, I imagine most people have had to play around with ChatGPT or something, write me a scenario of a 45-year-old man with chest pain, and it can do a half decent job of that. Well, likewise, this sort of allows us to put in some sources, and then people can step through a sort of coached process of simulation design. And so that's been hugely exciting. And I think we are at the point of being able to use, and the word I would use is AI coaches to help us with a lot of our tasks of simulation design, delivery, and particularly for translational sim, collection and processing of data. And so some of the self-development I'm doing right now is actually in data science and thinking about how we go from we tested out the building and found 800 latent safety threats, and we sent them all to the CEO who needs to fix them now.
All 800.
Yeah, exactly. To perhaps a more sophisticated data strategy with our simulations, starting right up front for when we think, well, what problem are we trying to solve here? What question are we trying to answer? What data will help us do that? And how will we use the simulation to help us collect that data, to analyze it, and then to create the actionable insights? And that's been huge fun. Again, sort of a disclosure, but also sort of a boast. I'm getting to work with Ladle here, who are thinking about how they move into the healthcare quality improvement space. And that's been really helpful because, we made a lot of comments about mannequins. I do feel for industry. They are often trying to help the people, obviously, who are their customers. And so thinking about how they can move into different spaces and offer the tools to do that. And they are people with resources. And so that's actually been a really nice way to work outside of the environment where you and I spend more of our space in, which is the sort of health services and academic sectors. So it's kind of nice to, speaking of fault lines, think about other ways of thinking about simulation. So that's been super fun. So I think watch this space. I think lots of people will be doing similar things. And I'm very hopeful that means that we'll be doing better quality sims with more focus to them. And interestingly, coming full circle, we find more and more that our design features for this translational type sim involve very simple modalities like VEMS. Like we're going to be testing out this new wing in the hospital, literally with cardboard cutout patients that we can stand up and, just be a representation of a patient as we walk around and test the workflows, the physical environment, the equipment layouts. And so, interestingly, I'm rather hopeful that this will help us not have over-specified simulation and reduce the resources required, which obviously then improves our return on investment.
The ROI, that's exactly. I was like, ooh, this ties back really well to ROI, right? Yeah.
So that's my other sort of little itch I'm scratching right now.
I love it. You're learning new skills, data science. I love the terminology you use for as an AI coach. I think we're all kind of trying to figure out how can we use these new tools. And then I love that you're like, I'm helping industry figure out how they can help us, right? Helping them help us.
Right. Yeah. What an opportunity. I mean, at my great age, to still be on this learning curve is quite a thrill.
Yeah. Well, this has been great fun, just chatting with you and hearing about what are the things you're up to. And I'm hoping our listeners feel the same. I really appreciate you giving your time to us.
Yes, thank you. It's been such a lovely chat, and good luck and well done on the podcast. I think you and your team are turning out such great work, and I've no doubt your listeners are really appreciative of it. So thanks for the opportunity.
It's very kind. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the IPSS podcast. A special thanks to our behind-the-scenes producer, the talented Danish Kumar, and to the Starship Foundation for providing the equipment that makes this podcast possible. Join us next time.